Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.
Welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I've got another special guest with me here today. I've got Mitch Walker from True Active Physiotherapy. He has multiple titles, actually, at different places. Mitch, do you want to just talk about yourself a little bit and what you're doing at the moment? And yeah, I guess at the moment we're in end of August and we've got the AFLW season about to kick off as well.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me, Trent. So I'm a physiotherapist, predominantly a sports physiotherapist at the moment. I own a clinic in Dingley Village called True Active Physiotherapy. We're predominantly a sports and musculoskeletal physiotherapy clinic, but we see a bit of everything. Have done a range of sporting-based physio roles up until now. So worked at a range of local football clubs and worked my way up into some netball. Have worked through the Pathways program with Netball Victoria, including the 17s and the 19s state programs, Vic Fury as well, and have recently jumped ship to AFLW and now working with the Melbourne Demons, and have been with them now since our third season. So we've just finishing our pre-season now and about to launch into hopefully another premiership after a successful last season. So yeah, really enjoying my time there, and it's a good split working between privately within a clinic space, and also being actually out in the field with players in a club, and it's something I think I'll really enjoy.
Yeah, how do you find the contrast between working in the clinic versus working in the club itself? Because obviously they're two different environments.
Yeah, good question. Look, it's hugely different. Being in the club, I think one of the benefits that you have is you've got regular contact with players, and you've also got a really large amount of staff that are also helping out with the management of players day to day. So we've got 3 physiotherapists working with the team. We've got a doctor, we've got a dietitian, we've got a psychologist, and then there's a range of other staff that are involved. And the contact hours have also increased with women's footy recently. So we're there at the moment on a Tuesday and a Thursday and a Monday, and then we have training witness sessions on the weekends. We see them all the time. So it can be in some ways different in the way that you can sort of build them up much more quickly in some situations, because you can see them much more regularly, and then also just you've got a large group of people that are taking care of the athlete, so you don't have to pull all the weight in terms of getting them back. There's a lot of people helping out, S&C coaches here, we've got a high performance manager all there and a rehab coordinator all helping us out to get them back. Whereas in private practice it's obviously a little bit different. The setup we have, we're quite lucky. We've got a large gym space, so we can see people, how they move, how they perform in the gym, and other bits and pieces, which is quite helpful. But you're seeing different people with different goals and other walks of life, which is sometimes refreshing. And the other part to that is because you're the only one that's taking care of that player, you've often got to be across a lot more things in terms of what they're doing, their training load, what they're doing in terms of their gym and other bits and pieces, and working within a team which is often obviously not on site. So if they've got a doctor or an orthopaedic surgeon touching base with them, and if they're with S&C, then dealing with them if they're off site. So it's a different sort of setup, but the mix is really good.
Yeah, that's good. Now, talk to us about the actual season, because the AFL and AFLW seasons are very different in terms of starting and ending and how long the seasons go for when you have contact time with them. I guess you've been with Melbourne for the last 3 years, correct? So how have you seen the last 3 years change in terms of the amount of contact that you have, and how has that kind of positively or negatively influence your ability to deliver, outcomes for the athletes to return back from injury to, just dealing with niggles to, I guess, more the day-to-day and the large outcome of, getting a premiership?
Yeah. Well, look, the AFLW's changed like a heap over the last few seasons. Initially when it first started, most of the girls had full-time jobs or still studying full-time, and so training sessions were generally outside of work hours. We had a weekend training session to be generally something that looked probably similar to what most local footy training sessions would look like, a Tuesday and a Thursday, and then often a weekend session as well. But then as the professionalism is increased and the players have been paid a little bit more, it's sort of shifting now into we've got training sessions that are much larger. We see them for a longer period of time now. So, for example, our Tuesday training sessions, we see them during the day which is much different to what we've previously done. And on a Thursday training session, is still an afternoon session, but our contact hours is much more, which I think definitely helps. Because you can, from our perspective, there's much more time for us in terms of planning and programming and that, which is helpful. But also in terms of touching base with the players, seeing how they pull up and being able to get that one-on-one time with them, which I think's been really useful. The other part, I suppose, from the players' perspective is a lot of the time we've got players that are managing full-time jobs and also trying to play footy at the same time. And if you're we've got some players in the trade, we've got some players, working 36-hour weeks and then trying to play footy. And so when you're trying to rehab an injury and then play at top-level sport, that can be challenging. And so now there's a bit more remuneration for the players, and more players are working part-time as opposed, or just a few days a week, and linking that within footy. It's a bit easier for the players to also dedicate their time to their craft and their footy, and hopefully they don't get injured. But if they were to get injured, they've got a bit more resource and time available to get them back as well, which I think's been really positive for the game and the players in the sport.
Yeah, it sounds like the AFL back in the day when it was a bit still considered amateurish. You might get paid, per game or something like that, but you still had to work part-time or full-time or studying. But I think now it's just more the same, but I think the process has just been really sped up because I guess the learning lessons from that, I guess now you've got more eyes on the game than ever before. You got, I guess the girls, the footballers themselves are actually promoting the game a lot more. I think I definitely see a lot more of that side. But then, as a result, the grassroots side has really shot up. As a result, the grass is literally getting greener on the women's side of the game. So it's going to be a really interesting space to see how it goes in the next 3 to 5 years. Also has to compete against other sports as well with the Matildas. Making they made the semis. They've got to deal with that. They also got to deal with basketball. Basketball's one of the biggest sports in Australia. Then NRL's slowly getting up there. Then you also got Super Rugby as well. It's like there's a lot of competition when it comes to female sports. But let's talk about some of the athletes that you see in the practice as well. Like, what are they coming to you for? How do you go about treating them and looking after them, and how do you go about having that? I guess the care beyond when your role is kind of not obsolete as such, but when you've kind of done your job and done your role, how do you go on with that extra hours care essentially?
Yeah, good question. Look, it depends on the athlete, depends on the sport in terms of the things we see. We see a fair bit of netball at the clinic. We also see, obviously, footy, and so they get different types of injuries. In terms of what we see pretty commonly, and let's talk about youth sport and sort of those levels, which we see much more of. The common presentations we'd often see, ankle sprains, classic sort of condition we see a fair bit of. Patellofemoral or sort of front of anterior knee pain, that's also a really common condition we see a fair bit of. Back pain is another thing we see a fair bit of. They have a high frequency. They're generally those three injuries you can manage and turn them around reasonably quickly. There's obviously some variances and some that take longer and some that are a bit quicker, but they're pretty frequent. But then you can see other injuries which have a much higher burden, things like ACL injuries, which we're unfortunately seeing a bit of, stress fractures as well, which is another one that pops up a bit more than what we now. We've got players that are playing different sports and training loads are increasing. We're seeing that a fair bit more than what we're used to as well. Those are probably the most common things we see. In terms of, I suppose, parallels to the things that we're seeing in athletes with those conditions, there's often a lot of basic things that contribute to it. Movement patterning, fundamental movements on how they land, how they squat, how they jump, how they hop. And a lot of the time, even just today in clinic, we've spent some time with the patient working on some basic things that they're probably already doing in their warm-ups that they're probably not doing correctly, and a lot of my time is cleaning up bits and pieces like that as opposed to giving them additional rehab.
Yeah, hold on for that for a second, that thought. So because you mentioned some of the issues of why there's a bit of, you mentioned there's kind of like an upswing in terms of like serious injuries that are presenting at the moment.
Yeah.
What do you think is really contributed to that? Is it because of like the lack of strength? You mentioned that like the movement patterns that you're seeing are really kind of like, there's a lack of quality in terms of their movement and developing the quantity on top of that quality. What do you think that's driving it?
I think that movement patterning is a huge part, and I think now there's Instagram and other things that are out there. There's a lot of really complex things out there and a lot of cool-looking exercises and bits and pieces that people often do. But to be honest with you, I think a lot of the time, good quality movement and good quality basic movement patterning is probably one of the big things that we see perform quite poorly. Knowing how to squat, lunge, hinge, basic things that I know no athlete do a lot of are really foundational movements to a lot of the things that you do out on the court and on the field and on the pitch as well. And I think that having an understanding on how to do those things early, I think is really important. And there's different ways that can be integrated, but I think that's a really key aspect. We can talk a bit about like how that links into warm-ups and things like that a little bit later on if you'd like, but I think that's really key. Load management's probably another part as well, and this sometimes is a challenge, particularly in netball. I think when you've got players that are often playing for 2 or 3 clubs at the same time, have multiple training sessions, maybe playing for sport and other bits and pieces, and have high training loads, being able to know how to prioritise what's important for them, and being able to sort of navigate multiple people trying to work within that space, and sometimes to their detriment, you'll have players training a lot but not actually spending much time in the gym or recovering outside of those sessions, and building themselves up as an athlete as well, which I think is also important.
You kind of alluded to the kind of how we can go about it and what you've done with some of the athletes as well. So what are some solutions to that if the patterning is off or the warm-ups is not as on par that you would hope for? You know, what are you doing specifically with them? Yeah,
good question. So the warm-ups, I think, is a really big one. There's a lot of programs that have now been released for different sports in terms of more formalised warm-up programs. So like the netball's had the knee program for a long time. Women's football has something called Prep to Play, which has come out. The FIFA 11's a common one for soccer, but there's a lot of formal sort of injury structured warm-up programs, and probably and there's good evidence that if you're doing a good warm-up it can assist in reducing injury, but it's probably not the way that I think we've traditionally thought of what a warm-up is. Most of the time when you think of warm-up, a lot of the time people think of that as literally just increasing core body temperature,
the old school uni way,
yeah, things like that, getting the joints loose and that sort of stuff. But I can tell you now, there's kids regularly going out and playing at lunchtime and recess and aren't doing a structured warm-up before they go out and have a muck around with themselves. And
it's not real world.
Yeah, exactly. Really where I think the value is you're trying to use that as almost a skill development opportunity to reinforce and work on movement patterns, as we've discussed beforehand, squatting, hopping, jumping, landing, and doing those into different environments, and doing those with good quality and doing them with intent, that I think is important. And I often think sometimes warm-ups can become too big and too confused and not have intent and focus on what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've been doing with Melbourne Swimming at the moment, is I'll break their warm-up into 2 different parts. We do like a generalised warm-up. It's more of a fun game. We might get them into like a bear crawl position. They've got to play tags. So they've got to kind of move around in space and, in a controlled fashion and whatnot. Then afterwards, we'll do some sort of specific stuff. If we want to, improve, do some, bird dog, some sort of crawling patterns to thoracic mobility, and drive internal rotation, especially for the breaststrokers as well, for the kicking. Then I'll split the warm-up into more of a power-based work as well, with upper body power and lower body power. And then we actually just get stuck into the actual training afterwards as well, because the mobility and the injury prevention will come within the actual program when you can load up the tissues correctly. We get the intermuscular sequencing on par as well, which we tend to see a lot of. If you get someone doing a deadlift and they just lift their chest up straight away, they're more than likely going to use a QL and just drive everything through the lower back as a result, and not even feel their glutes. And you ask them, then ask them, like, where do you feel that? So I feel like my lower back's just getting jacked up. It's like, all right, you're not really using your legs in order to drive the movement. So, the warm-up is definitely an opportunity to improve the quality of movement. But then even I think definitely the session itself is really another opportunity to actually break it down into its sequences. And I know with Melbourne Swimming, we've been working really hard to, I guess, utilize a lot of isometrics. Isometrics have become the new craze now, which I've seen. And I think I've been implementing them for the last 3 to at least 4 years now in a lot of training programs across a lot of sports, and seen some huge success in terms of, whether it's return to train, return to play protocols, even utilizing them more in warm-ups than ever before, and they actually feel a lot more physically prepared and getting away of the two laps around the park, do some leg swings, some run throughs. I'm like, get that trash out of here. I think I stopped using that after 2017. I'm like, I just threw it out, and I'm like, we can't be using this because it's not actually helping to develop the tissue quality, the sequencing of the muscle, the intermuscular coordination, the timing, the joint angles that we want to see, the body positioning and the body awareness, motor control, and then just being able to seek and then be able to isolate and integrate that in terms of like maybe a small-sided game or something like that as part of their warm-up. Then they can go train, whether it's if it's a field session or whether it's in here, they can get after the weights pretty much straight away. Yeah,
that's it. I think that's it. And I'm often thinking about, particularly at the young levels, you're trying to make the job easy for the next person. Like if you can, at the really young ages, teach them how to do these basic things well, hopefully then when they come into a facility such as Inner Athlete and that, and you get them to do, to squat or to lunge or to hinge and that, and if you can get them to the point where the basics are down pat, it just makes the progression so much easier, as opposed to having to pull people back and really clean up basic things that hopefully, if you can coordinate and really ingrain early, I think it makes their progression as an athlete and even just jumping to different facilities so much smoother.
Yeah, and that's like our big focus, because we've got a few athletes that eventually will move on from here to bigger and better things, and we're totally happy for them. And the biggest thing is, teaching the good motor patterns, skills in terms of different movements on the gym floor, and obviously, progressing and peaking them for certain competitions for what it may be. Then transitioning them to be able to go to that next stage as well. So whether it's like another academy to college, or even like a national squad or team or something like that, that they're actually more physically prepared for when they do go there, and it's a smooth transition, and they're going to be able to extract more value whilst they're there, because sometimes their window might be really short for whatever reason. Sometimes it's factors in the control, and sometimes more so it's factors outside of their control. So then they can actually get what they need and move on to the next phase of their development.
For sure, 100%. I think the reality also in semi-elite and a lot of other environments is when when they're jumping into, I know this happens a lot in college sport in America, but also in a lot of environments here, is you don't get that one-on-one time all the time when you're in the gym. They're put into a large group environment, and you'll get feedback here and there, but if you can, obviously as they're cleaning their movements up and moving with really good skill and in positions that you need them to get to here, it hopefully means that when they jump into that environment that they're pretty competent with the basic things that they need to do, and I think it makes a massive difference and it makes the life of the S&C coach easier at the next job, which is always a good thing if you've got an athlete that can do those things well, but then no doubt has a positive impact to their athletic performance as well.
Keep an eye out on the second installment of our conversation. If you want to stay updated on the latest episodes, make sure to subscribe to Inner Athlete on both YouTube and Spotify.